We haven't done a lot on polling and where we are as we head into, I mean, I know we still have a good bit of time before the midterms, but trust me, these things are already taking shape, already heating up. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time on the horse race and taking a look at where things stand as best we can tell as of today. Harrington did a breakdown specifically on the issue of inflation and how Trump has really fallen off a cliff on the issue that voters continue to say is their #1 concern. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Look, voters on Trump and inflation. He won the 2024 election because he was more entrusted on inflation than Kamala Harris was, led by a margin of 9 points. Look at where his net approval stands today, though, on inflation. My goodness gracious. On the issue that got him elected, he led on by 9 points on it last year, and now he's 25 points underwater. As I said, this is a complete and total disaster for the President of the United States. Trust which party more on inflation? You go back to the 2022 midterms, look at this. Republicans led by 13 points on which party was more trusted on inflation. Look at where we are now. Nearly a 15-point shift in the Democrats' direction. It's within the margin of error, but the Democrats up by a point. This just looks totally different from where we were back in 2022 when, of course, Republicans took back the House. That's what Democrats are trying to do this time around. What is the top issue for you right now? It's a runaway. It's inflation. It's 34% compared to the economy, which is basically very similar at 16%, Medicare and Social Security at 14%. But the bottom line is voters in poll after poll after poll say that Donald Trump has taken his eye off the ball, off the big issue of the day, which is inflation. And that is why Donald Trump is way underwater on this issue. And it's why Democrats have caught up to Republicans on the all-important issue of inflation.
And Saagar, in some ways, I think that last piece about which issues are most important to people is maybe the most devastating for Republicans, because as Harrington points out, Trump is now very unpopular on any economic issue, but inflation, certainly. So inflation is the #1 issue. Economy in general is the #2 issue. I don't think just like firing the BLS person and not putting out jobs report is really going to fix that for him. And then #3 is Medicare and Social Security. Well, what do you think that's about?
Yeah, that's
about the big, beautiful bill. That's why people are concerned about Medicare. And I do feel like the big, beautiful bill is that we probably need to talk about it more, because I think for average people, it's factoring into their perception of this presidency much more than it's sort of given credit for. Because just think about the numbers. You have millions of people who now have to be concerned about whether or not they're going to have health care going forward. And you pair that with the fact that the way that's being financed is a giant tax cut predominantly for the rich, and it is an utter political disaster.
Yeah, especially on the Medicaid front, right?
Yeah.
Where you're going to see some impact. And I mean, by the way, part of the problem with the messaging or whatever around this is that, for a lot of people, they didn't necessarily read Medicaid. They thought maybe it said Medicare.
Yeah. Well, there are changes to Medicare as well, but the bigger changes are certainly Medicaid.
Particular Medicaid, SNAP, any of those types of programs. By the way, just as you and I were talking, there is a new report out that shows that the core producer price, the PPI inflation, came in at 3.7% versus 2.9%. And the stock futures are diving, literally, as you and I are talking right now. The wholesale price rose by 0.9% in July, which is much more than expected. Quote, the producer price index, which features final demand goods and services, jumped 0.9 compared to the Dow Jones estimate of just 0.2%. That's excluding food and energy prices. So that's particularly wholesale goods, which is going to show up at the grocery store. I know 0.9 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's much more about the impact of the overall rise in inflation. It's almost 3 times higher. It's as high as it's been since April of 2021 in terms of the jump. So that is one where it could be a precursor to higher inflation. Just again, though, that's going to be something that if the economists, the stock market, and all these people are worried about, that could be something that's showing up for you. Combine it with the Social Security, the Medicare, any of this stuff where, again, look, I mean, Social Security didn't get touched, but the Medicaid stuff, and in particular the tax cut, because again, the thing about the tax cut that everybody doesn't remember is that that's when the Trump presidency in 2017 went off the rails. The first 6 months of the first Trump administration was an outright battle inside between like Paul Ryan and Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon. Remember, Steve Bannon had his whiteboard for all the things that they wanted to do. And there was even a theory about the border wall. There was this floated tax called the border adjustment tax, which, by the way, would have been a great tax, which went after remittances and in trade. It was supposed to be an initial kind of trade imbalance way to correct with Mexico, and that would have financed immigration enforcement. And the entire GOP was like, yeah, we're not doing that. They're like, we're cutting taxes for rich people, and that's it, right? And so by the time that came out with the corporate tax, the reduced taxes, not only for corporations, but for the highest income brackets, that is really where Trump sank to his lowest ever level of support. It makes total sense to me. It's very similar to Obamacare. If you think back to the coverage of the 2010 election, the anger that was bubbling up in the town halls was over Obamacare, but the country national media had kind of moved on from there. By that point, they were talking about various different things, but that is what slammed them at the ballot box. So it's very possible that inflation, and in particular the capriciousness around trade policy, what I have found is that Americans don't want to tune into the news on the economy. They want it to just run. And so when they have to check every day, not only their portfolio or businesses have to pause deals and unpause, have to pause hiring, and then maybe reduce salary, or if you have to think about policy when it impacts your business, that's when people get upset. They don't want it to. They only want to pay attention whenever it's good. But when it's bad, that's not what they want. And by and large, that's mostly where things are right now.
Well, and you pointed out, too, there are certain key items where you can really see that price hike directly as a result of tariffs. In fact, I sent us this morning, Ro Khanna is doing something smart. He's introducing legislation to roll back specifically the tariffs on coffee. Because we hit Brazil so hard, because we're mad at them over their court decisions with regard to Bolsonaro, that is causing coffee prices to spike dramatically. It also is causing beef prices to spike dramatically. Good probably for American cattle ranchers, but if you're trying to include steak in your diet here in the U.S., it's going to become much more costly. So in any case, I thought that was a clever tactical move from him.
Smart.
And
the coffee
to
thing,
put pressure on them.
Look, it's something I think the vast majority of Americans drink coffee every single day. If not, it's probably like 70, 80%. I need to check the data. But the point is that if you look at the way it will really impact you is if you buy it at a retail chain like Starbucks or anything. By the way, Starbucks or anything. Has anyone been recently? I never go to Starbucks. I went, it's like $5. I was like, what the hell is going on here? Yeah, exactly. I was like, whoa. I mostly brew almost entirely all my own coffee. I'm pretty much, immune from whatever the retail market or anything. But every once in a while, you'll just check and you're like, what the hell is going on?
Even if you're not going to Starbucks, like how many, blue collar guys are going out, early morning, they're stopping at 7-Eleven, getting their cup of coffee as they're on the road headed to their job. This is very common, experience, cross-class experience.
Yes.
And those would be the people who will be most sensitive to those price increases. And so even if it's not $5 at Starbucks, you're still going to notice that price increase.
Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and get to this next slide that shows you where the generic ballot is. So this is just if you ask people, would you vote for whoever the Democrat is or whoever the Republican is in your congressional district without specific names attached, who comes out on top? And you can see, listen, let's all take the polls with a grain of salt at this point in our lives, at this point in American history. However, you have a very consistent trend here in favor of Democrats. The overall RCP average has them up 3.5% on the generic ballot. You've had one poll from Yahoo News. Actually, this Atlas Intel one is the highest one up on the board of +8 for Democrats. More common is more in the 2, 3, 4 type of range. But, a significant edge, especially when you consider that Republicans have a very narrow edge in the House. Now, what is going to happen with all this redrawing of the maps in Texas and California and New York and whatever's going on there? I don't know. Maybe Republicans, but I think the very fact that they're pulling the fire alarm to potentially do a new census, to redraw these maps, et cetera, shows you they don't feel real great about their position going into the midterms either. Now, on the other side, on the flip side, let's put this next piece up on the screen. I think this is what Republicans are kind of comforting themselves with. The Democratic Party is wildly unpopular. Net favorability plunges to near 3-decade low, according to polls. And to me, Saagar, I think this reflects a lot of things. I think there's just like a lot of mistrust of the Democratic Party overall. But the reason it's reached this historic level of unpopularity, I and this is reflected in the data, is because there are a lot of Democrats that are disgusted with the Democratic Party. And I do think Israel is a big part of that, because it's just such a, moral atrocity. There's such massive divergence in, the numbers are starker than maybe any other issue I've seen, the distance between Democratic leadership and where the base is. Then you add to that they feel that they aren't fighting the Trump administration. They aren't, going to the mat to try to fight for democracy, fight against their, legislation in the ways that they want to see. And then you see like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries not even willing to endorse Zohran Mamdani. I mean, they're just an embarrassing, pathetic mess.
Yeah.
Especially at the higher up you go, the more embarrassing and cringeworthy it becomes. So I think that's a big part of why their favorability has sunk to such historic lows.
I saw it actually in the D.C. context. Dave Weigel was like, because the D.C. mayor and the politicians were all caught off guard. And Weigel was like, oh, you've only had 7 months to prepare, when he said he was going to do it on the campaign trail. It's like, if you're Chuck Schumer, fine, you're not focused on Washington, D.C. If you're Mayor Bowser, it's like, what, you never thought about it?
Yeah.
It's like you guys literally never thought about it. You had no plan for how this was all going to go, and the police chief embarrassing herself on national TV or anything. It's like, so what's happening, right? It's like, I think that's what's so frustrating for a lot of people.
Ryan and I interviewed a councilwoman who's more on the left.
Yeah, I remember.
Who was disgusted with her, and you're not even going to try a lawsuit to at least force them to say what the emergency is, at least go through that process. But instead, it was just like, okay, what are we going to do?
Yeah, I just thought it was crazy the way that, actually, D.C., another good example. Eleanor Holmes Norton, who, if you live in Washington, is she has a non-voting power in the House of Representatives. But it's symbolic. But I mean, you're a politician, you're popularly elected. What is she, 88 years old? She has not made a single public statement on what's happened.
And is running for re-election.
And by all accounts is to avoid any libel or whatever, hasn't showed up to a lot of events.
Yeah.
A lot of questions by some of her constituents about her health. The DC political machine doing nothing about it. And it's like, you look at that, if you're a Washington, D.C. lib, which statistically 95% of you are, you should be really mad about that. I mean, if everyone on license plate says no taxation without representation, but it's like even your representation is doing nothing.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying, if you're a Republican, you should be like, yeah, that's hilarious. But if you're a Democrat, you should be mad. I mean, you should think about it in the Republican context from back in 2009. That's exactly why they voted out so many of their leaders in 2009 or in 2010 and again in 2014, because they felt completely abandoned on the issues that were the most core to them.
Yeah, and that's what is different, is that they do feel abandoned. Democrats do feel abandoned by their leaders in a way that is very different from any other time, that I've seen in modern history. And if you play out that Tea Party 2010 wave analogy, you also had Republicans unpopular with their own base, but that didn't mean that they didn't do well in the midterms. There was, a massive wave. Obama called it a shellacking. So many Democrats swept out of office. It ends up being incredibly consequential, because then you had the 2010 census, then you had redistricting that helps to lock in the political era that we're in at this point in time. But in any case, so I don't know that this number of Democratic unpopularity is going to be the saving grace that Republicans hope it is. Now, what I will say is, if they were doing a lot better, I think they would be poised, if they were fighting in a way and had a clear and compelling message and had people who were younger than 80 years old making that clear and compelling message on a day-to-day basis, I think they would be in position to truly romp and have, an opportunity to maybe take back the Senate or things like that. I think the fact that they are not particularly trusted will limit the gains, but I still think they're probably well-positioned, and history would indicate that in this midterm, you're likely to get a backlash against the incumbent party in any case. The other thing that to keep an eye on that's coming up more rapidly here is there are 2 states this year that have their governor's races, New Jersey and it's Virginia. New Jersey, obviously more of a Democratic state, and Virginia more of a swing state. Can put B4 up on the screen. So this race is going to pit former undercover CIA agent Abigail Spanberger.
Why are these spooks running? It's
the Democratic
too much
Party
for me.
loves any national security, police, whatever. They love that. This is a Rahm Emanuel thing, actually. Recruited all these like veterans and, cops and whatever. So anyway, that's who Abigail Spanberger is. She's very centrist-y kind of a Democrat. And the Republican is Winsome Sears, who is the current lieutenant governor. And right now, Spanberger has a pretty wide and, as far as I can tell in the polls, quite consistent lead. Now, again, the polls can be wrong. But I will say in Virginia, Winsome Sears has a particular problem because of DOJ. So many federal government employees live in Virginia. And I'm not just talking about Northern Virginia, although Northern Virginia is where a lot of the political power in the state is at this point in time. You also have a lot of federal government jobs throughout the state surrounding many military bases, et cetera. I mean, the little town I live in is based around, a civilian scientist naval research center called Dahlgren. And so this is a very key issue. And Winsome Sears has not availed herself well when she's talking about DOJ. She's been unable to separate herself from the Trump administration, unable to separate herself from the DOJ federal government worker cuts. And so, I think that has significantly hobbled her chances, and I think it was going to be a difficult race to begin with. I believe I saw something about the RGA basically abandoning and not funding.
Yeah, it's all a question of how much she's going to. I mean, I think Spanberger might been, what do you think, 17, 18 points? I don't think that's too far. So what's
I don't know.
Youngkin won by 2. What was the 2017
I'm going to say Spanberger
blowout?
by 7.
Spanberger by 7. Wow, that's still actually lower than I would think, because all indications right now are just a blowout. Put B5 up there on the screen. I sent this because this just shows you how crazy things are. The Virginia Police Benevolent Association, which 4 years ago supported every Republican in the state, is now backing Spanberger over Winsome Sears. They're like, she's done. We don't even have a choice.
Well, I think that's what it is.
Yes.
First of all, Spanberger did try to vote for police funding. She was certainly never a defund the policer, right? But they endorsed against her when she ran for Congress. And so now I read it as they see the writing on the wall and they're like, we may as well endorse her and be in good with her because it'll put us in a better position to advocate for whatever it is we want when she's governor. That's how I read the endorsement anyway.
I think that's the right way to see it. But the point is just that it's always been a precursor. This one, I think, as you said, it's more of an outlier just because DOJ is going to be so impactful. If you saw yesterday, Emily and I covered the layoffs, highest since 2021. A massive portion of it is government employees.
Yeah. Massive
portion of those are going to live in Northern Virginia. And so those people are just, these are my neighbors. They're irate. They probably hate Trump more this time than last time because of DOJ. They just can't stand it.
Here's the other thing is it's not just the direct federal government employees, the contractors.
Yeah, right.
So many of these contracts, the funding was cut. And, even if you're not losing your job, okay, you're not on with this particular client. I was actually just talking to a woman about exactly this. She's like, well, they cut our contract over at, I can't remember, I think she was at USDA. And so now there's not really a place for me to go internally. So I'm just going to be working at Booz Allen Hamilton, doing the whatever in the office. And so it has a wide-ranging impact. And if you drive around this area, within a 40-mile radius, it's contractor after contractor after contractor. And this has been a huge upending of their lives. And, it's the having to come into the office, it's the change to lifestyle, the commuting, the pay cuts, the contract loss, the actual job loss, just the chaos and the uncertainty, which is very stressful. So that will definitely weigh on the Virginia race. In some ways, it'll be interesting to watch the New Jersey race, even though all expectations are that the Democrat, Mikey Sherrill, who's another centrist-y type of Democrat, all expectations are that she will end up prevailing, but the margin there will be interesting to see as well if there's some sort of a Democratic overperformance, especially since New Jersey was a state where Trump sort of overperformed. So
yeah, that's right. I still wonder how much of that is a 2020. I think the 2024 election will be the high watermark for Republicans and Republicanism for quite a long time. There's a lot of reasons for that. The popular vote, you have the popular vote, you have the vibe, you have Kamala. Like, there are multifaceted reasons for why it was.
Yeah.
I think it could either be a flash in the pan or they could have built on it. I think the built on it has passed mostly at this point. I mean, they could still
We'll
win
talk
the
about
popular
this
vote.
more in the Laura Loomer box.
It's possible. It's very possible they could do it again. It would have to be, I think, a total change, both in the way that the two parties come into the 2028 election. But yeah, just looking at where things are trending right now and in terms of the way that they've handled themselves, it does not look like the midterms are going to go all that well. All gerrymandering or redistricting or whatever withstanding, which is still such an insane story, the way that
They could
is
also
all
screw
happening.
themselves with that. If
Yeah,
they
I
try
agree.
to,
Yeah.
if they try to be too cute and make the districts a little too tight, they could, like, it's not, you know.
Yeah, Ryan made that point.
It's
If you
an
go
uncertain thing.
52-48 in every single district, you can find yourself in some serious upsets, which happens in Texas all the time.
Especially because Trump has this particular unique pull. So the numbers that Trump pulled, let's say with Latino voters in, you know, the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, you can't rely on another random Republican to be able to pull the Ted Cruz or whoever to be able to pull
Ted
those kind
Cruz
of
ain't
numbers.
winning South Texas,
You know?
okay? Yeah, they probably hate him. You know, it's sad.
Many do.
honestly.
Very common story.
I'm sure John Cornyn is going to clean up down in Laredo. You know, it's like that's not happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, I think that makes it even dicier, is that Trump is sort of like his own entity. So you don't have as much predictability about the way individual like voting groups are going to behave. So anyway,
Well
we'll
said.
continue to track
I
that.
agree.
That's an interesting story in and of itself.
Agreed.
Let's go ahead and get to Israel.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.